Hey guys, Mr. Pokke here, back with another video. Welcome to another episode of CN Hypewatch, where I'll be going through review the CN Bro's opinion for an upcoming banner unit, this time featuring Fuxuan. These are strictly speculations from the CN side talking about her kit, and if you guys would like CN's perspective on who to pull for version 1.3, kindly check out my previous video on Imbibitor vs Fuxuan's CN pulling opinions. With our latest and only 5-star limited preservation, Fuxuan's arrival brings about a ton of questions amongst the player base. Can she solo sustain the team? Is Mono Quantum going to be meta? Do I pull for her if I already have Luocha? All these questions shall be explored in today's Hypewatch. Considering the latest Swarm Disaster's high demand for good sustained units as well as one-shot prevention, Fuxuan's kit is looking to be very promising. As mentioned in my previous CN Hypewatch, I'm not here to discredit any other content creators since each of them stems from a perspective that holds their own logic and reasoning. This series is not intended to be a guide, and for that, kindly check out my CN unit analysis for Fuxuan when that comes out after her banner releases. So these are purely opinions and speculations on future units. And with that out of the way, let's just jump straight into today's content. I'll first like to establish there might be a little bit more individual speculations for Fuxuan than team speculations, especially for support and sustain units going forward into the future, since they are more universal than DPS units who need a team to be built around the DPS, right? For support units, for sustain units, they can generally fit into most team comps, so we wouldn't talk that much about team speculations and exactly who do you want to pair Fuxuan with. So with that aside, let's talk about Fuxuan's first individual speculation, and this is by far the biggest question on everybody's mind. Can Fuxuan solo sustain? While I can't disclose her actual performance and numbers before her release, CN players are fully confident that she has the capabilities to do so. Her skill distributes all unshielded damage taken by allies to be shared with Fuxuan alone, and this, combined with a talent of reducing damage taken as long as she is alive or not crowd controlled, essentially enables your team to play with an upgraded Destruction's 3-star blessing, regression, inequality of annihilation. Oh, and on top of this, there is a single chance to mitigate any crowd control as long as her skill is active, and this acts kind of like an immunity buff for units, which in a sense is even better than the cleanse since this is more proactive, while cleanse is reactive and has to wait for the CC to actually land. In situations like Jingyuan, who heavily needs crowd control cleanse, especially before Lightning Lord takes action, Fuxuan's CC immunity buff will be immensely useful, right? Preventing him from getting crowd control in situations where units like March 7, Natasha, Bronya, or even Luocha, if the damage is too small, cannot prevent this crowd control from taking place. Hence, units that are weak to crowd control can rejoice if you guys are going to be pulling for Fuxuan. Now, diving further into her talent, Fuxuan is also able to heal all allies after her ultimate usage, and this seems to be Fuxuan's only heal unless you pull for her signature Lightcone. Furthermore, she also has self-sustain when coupled with the talent's self-heal and ultimate, raising the talent's heal count. While the heal amount for both herself and her team is undisclosed, it is very likely that energy regeneration rope would be needed, especially for players not pulling on her signature Lightcone, to ensure timely ultimates and sustain for the entire team. After all, reduced damage taken and damage distribution is insufficient for long, drawn-out fights where the team gets slowly whittled down, especially against enemies that have a lot of AoE abilities, such as Cocolia, the Deer, or even the Swarm Disaster through Sting. To summarize, there should be no issues for Fuxuan to solo sustain against enemies MOC or Swarm Disaster, but she may face issues against mobs that deals repeated high AoE damage to the entire team, slowly reducing the team-wide HP while Fuxuan's ultimate is not fast enough to keep up. Now, moving on to the next discussion is gonna be DPS Fuxuan. Now, some players in CN have theorized using Fuxuan as a sub-DPS via 4-piece quantum set for its damage percentage and defense ignore. And this is especially important for players who already have Silver Wolf that can implant quantum weakness, bringing the defense reduction from 10% to 20%. Now, the main thought process behind this was that as long as Fuxuan does not die, the damage distribution and damage reduction capabilities on Fuxuan are still on the table, and the team's survivability will be essentially the same unless Fuxuan is killed because of a reduced tankiness from like a lack of Wuthering Guard, a lack of Longevious Disciple. So since we cannot talk about the multipliers such as Fuxuan's actual damage, we can only discuss the situation of a quantum 4-piece Fuxuan and a non-quantum 4-piece Fuxuan, right? What is the opportunity cost between choosing these two sets? At the end of the day, as long as Fuxuan is able to survive, right, stay alive, then her purpose will be fulfilled, which is keeping the team alive. players sacrificing the HP percentage from Longever's Guard or damage percentage reduction from Guard of Wuthering Snow will need to compensate this with better substats or maybe even pulling for a signature Lightcone to ensure that Fuxuan is still fulfilling her primary purpose, which is to stay alive and keep the team alive. It is not advised to build Fuxuan with a goal of doing damage, but instead you can think of giving Fuxuan more damage as the secondary objective, right? You do not add sprinkles to a cake before the actual cake is baked. On the other hand, players are really not losing that much by not opting for DPS Fuxuan 4-piece, since her only damaging skills are her ultimate as well as her basic attack. Assuming that players go with a skill auto attack cycle, losing out that 10% quantum damage and 20% defense strat isn't a massive trade-off for some additional HP, damage reduction, or even speed if you guys want to run hacker space with Fuxuan. Further content regarding DPS Fuxuan will be done after the release in the topic of CN Theorycraft, where I'll be going through the DPS Fuxuan build. But for now, this is what we have. Now, another thing that might come into consideration is should players pull for Fuxuan's signature Lightcone. As of yesterday, miHoYo has already finalized Fuxuan's Lightcone's abilities, which is increasing the wearer's maximum HP by 24% and energy regeneration by 12%. When the wearer's HP is decreased, it increases the damage dealt by all allies by 9% for 2 turns, as well as at the beginning of each wave, it restores HP equivalent to 80% of the HP lost by the characters for each team. Whether players should pull for this Lightcone ultimately hinges on a single question: can Fuxuan sustain your team? If Fuxuan is able to sustain your team without this Lightcone, such as can Luocha sustain your team without his signature Lightcone, then that should answer a lot of doubts for players to have in mind. So first step is that players should go ahead and pull for Fuxuan and test out whether she's enough to help you sustain your team. If she can sustain your team, right, then there is no additional need to use her signature Lightcone because her primary purpose is already being fulfilled. Now, on the other hand, if players cannot use Fuxuan alone to sustain their team, then it's time to look at other alternative options. Right now, the 3 best Lightcones for Fuxuan as an alternative is gonna be Moment of Victory, Landau's Choice, as well as Texture of Memories. Now, for Landau's Choice and Moment of Victory, they are both Lightcones that increases a unit's taunt value. Even though Fuxuan does not scale with defense, so Moment of Victory might not seem that good on her, but taunt value is always going to be an integral part of any preservation unit because they have the highest taunt value in the game at 150. So increasing a preservation unit's odds of getting hit will directly contribute to less damage being dealt to the entire team, right? 1 more damage for Fuxuan is 1 less damage for your DPS. So any Lightcones that increases the unit's taunt value is going to be beneficial for Fuxuan herself. Now, speaking of Texture of Memories, ever since the beginning of the game, many players have either went for cruising the Zeta C or on the 4 of an Aeon, because back then these are much better than Texture of Memories because they benefit way more characters when the game first launched. Now with Fuxuan, Texture of Memories actually suit her very well because it does have effect rest on top of increasing Fuxuan's personal sustain. Now for any other preservation units, personal sustain is not that important, right? Units like Japard, March 7, Fire MC, they are inherently very tanky units, right? Their shield is very high, their defense is very high. Whereas for Fuxuan, especially for players that want to build like a DPS Fuxuan running 4-piece quantum, then Fuxuan might face the issue of not having enough durability for herself. So in this case, Texture of Memories is going to greatly improve Fuxuan's personal survivability. And as I mentioned previously at the start, Fuxuan's primary purpose is to ensure that she stays alive, doesn't get crowd control, so that she can provide the relevant buffs and damage reductions for the entire team, right? So with that being established, players could consider using Texture of Memories instead, especially if they have saved up all of their Herta bonds and used that for Fuxuan instead of getting her signature Lightcone. However, if players have none of these options and you are still facing survivability issues when using Fuxuan in your team, then players should consider investing in her signature Lightcone because all of the effects on her signature Lightcone is going to be beneficial for Fuxuan. Very similar to how all of the effects on Luocha's signature Lightcone is only beneficial for Luocha and none of the other healers. So consider that if you are pulling for Fuxuan's signature Lightcone, she might be the only preservation unit that can make use of this ability for now. And lastly, for Fuxuan's individual speculation is going to be Luocha versus Fuxuan. Now, we already know that Luocha is currently our best sustained unit by a mile, and while both units serve a purpose of being a sustained unit, which means keeping the team alive, they ultimately have very different usages and roles. Luocha excels at maintaining the team at close to their full HP with continuous heals through his auto skill, through his cleanse, through his healing field that heals the entire team. While Fuxuan on the other hand excels at reducing the potential of one-shots via damage reduction as well as damage distribution. Now as mentioned earlier, Fuxuan may face issues when facing against enemies that have multiple high AoE damage abilities, which reduces the effectiveness of damage distribution. This would be an issue that Luocha will unlikely face, but at the same time, Fuxuan can prevent one-shot scenarios such as the enemies in Swarm Disaster 5, which is something that Luocha cannot prevent. Ultimately, this is a general consensus from the CM player base. A player without an excellent 5-star sustain such as Luocha, Japard or Bailu should definitely consider pulling for Fuxuan, especially after looking at the direction that miHoYo is taking Honkai Star Rail, where more content with higher damage is being released, so sustain getting added to one's team composition will greatly increase a player's gaming experience when playing more difficult content. At this point, one could say that an excellent sustain unit is even more important than an excellent DPS or support unit, because what can a DPS or support do if they are already defeated in combat, which is something that your sustain unit will be able to prevent. Now on the other hand, if players already have Luocha, they should ask themselves if their team is still facing survivability issues from one shot, right? Because maybe their units are not developed enough, such as not having 3000 HP and 1000 defense. This will make them really weak to one-shots, not only in Swarm Disaster but also in Memory of Chaos. And as mentioned earlier, Luocha cannot really prevent one-shots from taking place, because if your unit is straight up just goes from 100 to 0, no amount of healing will bring them back. Whereas for Fuxuan, she can still go ahead and reduce the damage taken by the unit, such as via damage reduction as well as damage distribution. So at the end of the day, players need to do their due diligence whether they should be pulling for Fuxuan or they should be pulling for Imbibitor Lunae. Now let's move on to Fuxuan's team speculations. As mentioned earlier, Fuxuan by herself is already extremely flexible, right? Very similar to Luocha as a sustain unit, so Fuxuan can really be used with most if not all team compositions, especially for players that do not have a very good sustain unit. But that aside, these are the two biggest speculations to be discussed: mono quantum team as well as dual element teams. Now we have to first talk about mono quantum, since this team comp has been discussed ever since the release of Silverwolf, and now with Fuxuan as well as links in her banner, this team is finally becoming a reality. On paper, having Silverwolf implanting the right weakness 100% of the time, along with the sustain from Fuxuan or links as well as the damage from Sile or QQ, seems really nice, but in reality there are a lot of things and nuances to consider with this team composition. Now firstly, players will not use both Fuxuan and links on the same team comp, since there is more than enough sustain between both sustain units. And as of right now, I believe that majority of the players base that has played the game since day one should have a team comp where only a single sustain is used to clear most content. It is very rare that players will actually run 2 sustain on a single team unless they are playing Swarm Disaster, or maybe they just start out playing the game with not enough relic investments. If a player's team development is not strong enough and both sustain units are used, then the damage potential will definitely fall off, and hence a much better mono quantum team would be, instead of using links, players should use Qingque instead, acting as a sub DPS. Now since both Fuxuan and Silverwolf's buffs and debuffs benefit a double DPS setup, Fuxuan with the crit rate buff and Silverwolf's debuffs enabling any unit to benefit as long as they hit the debuffed target. So with that established, Qingque is a much better mono quantum teammate, especially at E6, which drastically reduces her skill point pressure. She's able to completely rely on basic attacks and ultimate to generate skill points while doing impressive damage, and this is much better than the additional links, which does not provide any extra offensive capabilities, and we have already established at the start that Fuxuan is able to solo sustain by herself with enough investments. But that being said, the mono quantum dream team is still missing a crucial ingredient: a 5-star harmony support. This will really take mono quantum team to the next level by massively buffing Sile's damage output. Now don't get me wrong, Sile's damage is definitely strong, right? She's an extremely good DPS in her own right, but at the end of the day, she is very similar to Imbibitor Lunae, where she is a hyper carry that appreciates getting as many buffs on her as possible, and she would prefer to be the only DPS while making the entire team revolve around Sile, right? Making sure that Sile stays alive, or making sure that Sile gets all the buffs she needs, as well as making sure that Sile hits the enemy with the right weakness. So unfortunately, in the long run, when a 5-star Harmony Quantum support comes out, then QQ has to be benched. Sorry Qingque, but there can only be one. So with all that discussed, these are the final thoughts on Mono Quantum team. It is a very resource efficient team that enables players to essentially save their resources instead of building additional units to cover multiple elemental weaknesses, right? As long as they've developed this Mono Quantum team, not saying that they might do the highest possible damage because Sile is now missing out crucial support units like Bronya and Tingyun, but at least you know that this Mono Quantum team is able to take you through majority of the stages you're gonna face in either Storm Disaster or Memory of Chaos. Now with Mono Quantum speculation being established, this is another team composition that CM players have cooked up. Duo element using Fuxuan and Silver Wolf. Now, Fuxuan and Silver Wolf, when combined together, they are one of the most flexible duos in Honkai Star Rail, as this brings about the duo element team archetype, such as pairing them with Blade and Bronya, Jingyuan and Tingyun, or even future units such as Jingliu and Pella or Topaz and Asta. With sustain from Fuxuan, weakness implant debuffs from Silver Wolf, as well as an on-element DPS with a supporting unit, this is looking to be free-to-play and low-spenders' most flexible team composition, maybe even more so than Mono Quantum team itself, because since now, Fuxuan and Silver Wolf can be effectively used in almost any team composition to implant the element against an enemy that are weak to quantum weakness or support a team who are already on the right element themselves. Now, we will be diving into team compositions of this dual element team in greater details after Fuxuan's release, but Silver Wolf owners who are lacking a 5-star sustain should definitely consider pulling for Fuxuan and assemble an almost universal duo that can be used with almost every single team comp once running this dual element setup. Now, is this team better than Mono Quantum right now? The consensus so far is yes, because Mono Quantum's biggest weakness is it doesn't have enough buffs to be provided for Sile, whereas if you are gonna be running for dual element with Fuxuan and Silver Wolf there to support and implant the right weakness, then there's definitely gonna be enough DPS as well as enough supporting capabilities from the buffer they're gonna be pairing with the DPS, right? Because Asta, Tingyun, Bronya, or Pella, they are all really good Harmony or even Nihility units, and this team should technically do way more damage than the Mono Quantum team right now before Mono Quantum obtain their 5-star Harmony unit. And on the other hand, it's not to say that this team takes a very large amount of investment as well, because as we know, Tingyun, Pella, Asta, Bronya, or essentially all the support units, they're super universal, and most players should be on their way building them even if they are not building multiple DPS units. So at the end of the day, CN do believe that dual element setup might be a better team composition than mono element until mono element gets their Harmony unit. And with that, we've come to the end of this CN Hypewatch featuring Fuxuan. If you guys would like to engage in any further discussions, feel free to check out my Discord, Pokke's Village, where we have a very active community discussing about Honkai Star Rail on a daily basis. If you guys would like to check out my stream, that's going to be twitch.tv/MrPokke. I'm streaming almost every single day now to grind for the Hoyoverse Twitch event, and my schedule will be updated in my Discord server. So that's all I have for today, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.